Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Autumn Colors podcast, and I'm your host, the Sozo-sha. Today, I'm going to be doing the podcast by myself. So, yeah. There's a couple reasons why, in particular, I like to do these with other people. At least one other person. The first is because I am an idiot. I like to have other people around me who have different experiences and even knowledge of certain topics of what I talk about, so that, if there's anything I forget or if there's anything I'm fucking wrong on, we can just kind of deal with it then and there. And two, usually, I like doing it with other people because I feel like the conversations are a lot, they're a lot more enjoyable to be around and everything. Honestly, or at the very least, they're a lot more enjoyable to be in discussions. But yeah, I don't know if people have been realizing this, but definitely over the years I've been doing this, at least 2. I have noticed that has led to some drawbacks, one of which being, well, in particular, I can't really talk about the stuff that I do want to talk about because none of my friends and whatnot really are interested in anything like that. Like, I can't talk about this game in particular or that game in particular because it's just like none of my friends really give a fuck about any of that. And I was just thinking, it's just like, I do want to talk about it, and I do want to make, like, a podcast episode on it, but it's also like, I mean, do I want to wait for them to actually play it or get interested, or do I just want to do it by myself? So I'm thinking, fuck it. And I think I'll kick things off this time in particular by starting with talking about Neva for a couple reasons. One, because it's the most recent game I have played that I've been very interested in personally, and 2, like I said, like, none of my friends really are interested in that game. Like, I haven't really seen or heard much of them actually discussing, hey, like, I'm interested in, like, playing Neva or anything like that, so I very much think I'm kind of alone on that end, but yeah, so instead of, like, waiting for them to actually get interested and play it, I'm just gonna make this episode and talk about it myself. If they do get interested in it, I might make another episode and talk about it there, but who knows. But yeah, we're gonna be talking about Neva. So, before I get straight into the game, I do want to talk about the people who made it and their previous entry, that being Nomada Studio and Gris. And I had never heard about this studio, I had never heard about this game until it was like 2018 or 2019, I think, and what I did remember looking at, like, the previews and everything, I thought this was going to be very much a sort of a hack and slash game, like a 2D hack and slasher, sort of like a Metroidvania in some ways, or at least a 2D Souls-like. And I was kind of thinking that was what it was going to be. We didn't get that. We got a platformer with no real combat prowess or ability, and mainly just a story that was done through visuals. And I think it's still a good story, contrary to what some people will say. I think it's still a good story, and I still like it. I do think that, looking back now, especially with Neva out, I do think there are some things where I feel like, yeah, I'm thinking back to when I first thought about what Gris was going to be. I'm just kind of like how kind of let down I was at first. So yeah, but at the end of the day, I mean, Gris is still one of my favorite games. I enjoy it perfectly fine. And I was actually surprised to see Nomada Studio come back with a game like this. I kind of figured it was going to be another game in the same light of Gris. I wasn't really expecting much of anything, but no, this game actually, like, blew out of proportion, like, the expectations or the bar that Gris had by a milestone. I mean, first off, this game has a slew of animations, not just like little like 2D sprite animations and whatnot, or not just little 2D hand-drawn animations. Like this has like animated cutscenes, and they're throughout the game. And when I was first playing it, it blew me away just how like similar yet different the game was in terms of its atmosphere, in terms of its visuals. Because you could very much like look at this game, you could look at Neva and then look at Gris and be like, yeah, that's kind of the same studio that did it, isn't it? And yeah, it is. But both the games are just so different in terms of the stories they want to tell. No, like Nomada Studio, when they did Gris, you could tell it was very much a story around portraying the different stages of grief. I would have to do more research into this, because again, it's still kind of like new. And here's the thing about me too, is that I don't really tend to do much research into the games I talk about, because I just kind of want to go with them sort of off the cuff, essentially. I want to just sort of talk about it to the best of my experience, because I just kind of want to talk about more so how much I remember games like these and everything to the best of my knowledge. And if I'm wrong, well, then I'll just do I'll look into it later and then try to maybe correct it if it's a genuine mistake. Sorry, I'm a little sick. But anyway. Yeah, with Gris, I feel it was definitely portraying this different stages of grief. This, I think it does have grief, but it's not the main focus. Like, death is definitely a factor. It's definitely a subject in this. But I think more so it's around the concept and the subject of survival. I think that's very much it. And also, in various ways, the passage of time as well. I think that's also a very big point. Like, sort of like how Gris was sort of about trying to... What's the word I'm looking for? Trying to deal with, you know, the death of someone close to you. In this, it very much feels like it is more around death, but more so the slower age, like the more natural one. It feels like a natural death, where as the story continues, as the story goes on, the season passes, time passes, and you can sort of feel the age. I think that's very much it. It's about sort of like, essentially in its own way, it's about time and the passage, and in its own way also survival. Like, very much things that just come with, I mean, I guess for lack of a better term, I mean, like, Gris is about sort of the process of grief. I think Neva is very much around the different stages of life in its own way. That's why I feel. And through playing the game, through the different visuals, like, it really... To me, I feel it honestly did a really good job at portraying that. It was just like, I wasn't expecting the game to go down this direction or anything, but it's just the way it tells the story just feels so, like, it just feels like, it feels so interesting, it feels so mystique in some ways. Because, like, from a visual standpoint, it really does feel like, with Neva and the main character you play as, it feels sort of like, I mean, from a visual standpoint, it does feel like a girl and her cool dog sort of just kind of travel the world and travel these different ruins and everything from like a sort of like a face value visual standpoint. But and I do feel like there is that, but I think very much like the different mechanics, such as the enemies you come across and whatnot, I feel definitely have more to say as opposed to it just being simply just, oh, well, you're just traveling these different ruins in different locations over the seasons. Yeah. Other than that, I mean, like, it's such a beautiful game. It really is. I love 2D animation. Don't know if anyone knows that about me. I'm a big fan of 2D animation. But it's just the way they utilize 2D animation, the way they utilize some visual effects, and so on. Just like, it feels so good. It just looks so beautiful, and I love it. Like, I love the passage of time, the different colors of the seasons, and the different colors to portray certain atmospheres. Like, it's really beautiful, the attention to detail that they have. So much so that I feel like it trumps Griss's, like, art direction in a lot of ways. Like, with Griss, the one thing I will say regarding, despite Griss being one of my favorite games, the one thing I will say that I don't necessarily like about either Griss or, to a lesser extent, Neva, is that this style of art direction has a big drawback, and that is the lack of visual clarity with interactive objects, if that makes sense. Like, there's a number of times throughout the games, either or, Griss or Neva, where there will be things that look like you can land on them, there are things that look that you can interact with them, there are things that will look like you can just jump on them. But they're just part of the background. And sometimes, if you don't actually play the game, if you don't actually, memorize it, it can be really tough to actually discern which is which. And so I do feel like I just do feel like that at the end of the day, it's just like, this I feel could be better perfected in a different way, instead of the way that they sort of have been going by. Again, I love these games, but that's a big drawback, I think, with its art direction. I don't know, it's been a while, but I think like a game like Cuphead, I think, nailed this perfectly, where much of the backgrounds are that old school sort of Warner Brothers, Disney-esque painted backgrounds, and the animation and stuff that's interactive very much has that rubber hose animation, the rubber hose animation style to it. And okay, like, Cuphead does have its points against it in some ways, depending on who you ask, but definitely I think the art style is not one of them. I do feel like they were able to discern what is and isn't interactive. What is and isn't interactive with, regarding, like, the gameplay. And I think I'd have to go back and look, but I think partially that was because very much they were blurring the backgrounds to an extent. To those who don't, like, do digital art in some capacity, it's not necessarily a great thing to have your backgrounds incredibly high detailed and full contrast when you have stuff going on in the foreground, because the stuff that goes on in the background can distract from what you have going on in the foreground. So, for example, if I had like two characters interacting in the foreground, right, and the background is complex as shit, like there's a bunch of like bookshelves full of books and so on and so forth, right, then what are you gonna pay more attention to? And that's a tricky question, because there's not one thing in particular to pay attention to. But if I were to sort of lower the contrast, essentially, like, just lower the contrast and blur the backgrounds just slightly, all of a sudden the backgrounds are less, like, focused on, they're less, like, high crisp in detail, and so the foreground in comparison to the background. The foreground will have more attention placed on it. So yeah, if you blur the background, if you make it less focused on, the foreground will be more first and foremost. And I feel like, I don't know, maybe something like that could definitely benefit further games down the line. It's just having that tool to, like, differentiate between what is interactable and what isn't. Like, you don't have to go, you know, you don't have to fog up the lens or anything, but it's just like being able to, for the player, first time playing or later in the game, to be able to differentiate what is and isn't, right? To be able to differentiate the difference between the background and the foreground, what is and isn't interactable, I think is an important value to have in terms of game design and art direction. Like that visual clarity, I think that's what you want to focus on. And with Neva, there are times where I just look at it and I'm just like, is there something here that is interactive? No? Okay. And I feel like that's a problem in and of itself. But that said, I mean, again, this game is just so, like, beautiful. And there's so much work put into it. I can already tell from a mile away. There is so much work put into the different characters' movements, the animations, the different fighting sequences, the different AI that you have to go against in their own animations. Like, hell, even some of the world actually has, like, the backgrounds, the environments have their own set of animations. Like, there is so much work put into this that I could break down little by little, bit by bit, if I just were to replay the game and go back to, like, level by level by level and just look at the environments. Yeah. And on that note, I mean, regarding the gameplay, it's definitely, like, when I said more or less I thought this was, I thought Gris was going to be sort of like a Metroidvania in its own way, this is kind of more along the lines of what I was thinking. I was actually surprised that you could fight in this game, and the fighting being incredibly, like, minimal. You don't have many options. You get some options later on, but very much your options in terms of fighting are very minimal. Meanwhile, your enemies are so many and so... What's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry. I just woke up and decided to do this. But there's so many enemies, and there's so many that have these variety of attacks, these different movesets, these different abilities. And altogether, it just makes for a challenging gameplay, but not impossible. That's genuinely what I love about it. This is something I mean, for all intents and purposes, I know this is the actual intent, but this is just what I don't necessarily like too much about a lot of Souls-likes, is that I think what I've nailed down regarding what I don't like about Souls-likes is that it always feels like I failed, and I have to redo a specific part over again as if it's a play. If that makes any sense? Like, making a performance, I fuck up on that performance, and the director says, cut, take again, take again, take again, take again, take again. That's what it feels like. Whereas with games like, say, I just recently got finished through it, games like Onimusha, death feels very much in the same case of it is permanent. Like, you don't get to continue on afterwards. You don't get to continue where you last left off. No, you continue where you last saved. So, in my eyes, I think Lost in that feels a little more... It feels a little more respectable in my eyes, where it doesn't feel like... It feels like very much I have the case of, like, a life, and I can't waste it. Whereas with... Essentially with Neva, it does follow the Souls-like formula, but I think the way the combat actually is utilized and just how smooth and how satisfying the combat and the dodging is, I think for me makes up for that. Like, it feels like a Souls-like in some way. Although, yeah, again, a lot of people would argue that this is sort of a Metroidvania because it follows a very similar formula compared to stuff like Metroid and Castlevania, or even Ori and the Blind Forest. And I get it. I understand. But in my mind, I think nowadays it feels very like a lot of these games do feel sort of like closer to Souls-likes in my eyes. In my eyes, I could be wrong on that, but either way, I mean, the game feels challenging, and yes, it does have save points, it does have checkpoints, but it feels satisfying in a lot of ways. Just the way the movement of your character and just how the different attacks feel, the sound design, the different animations that they have in store, like, all of this feels like it feels right. When I was playing it, I never thought like, oh man, this feels a little like this feels just kind of off. I didn't feel like this game, like, it didn't feel unnatural in a number of ways when I was playing the game. It felt about right. Now, yeah, there were some moments I noticed. Like, for example, you had some enemies, like, pick up a block, and I tried attacking them while they were picking up the block to sort of, like, either get them to drop it or to sort of stall them, but yeah, that wasn't gonna work. I got caught in their animation, and I ended up getting hit. And you could argue that is definitely a part of the difficulty, yeah. But, I don't know, it's just, I think those are very few in between moments. Otherwise, I mean, the gameplay feels so satisfying. I especially like later in the game when Neva starts growing up more and a lot of your attacks are followed by sort of Neva becoming this sort of like ghost. It's really like, I don't know, it's really interesting. I love it. It just it has this. God, what is the word I'm looking for? Is it Miyazaki-esque? I don't know if it's Miyazaki-esque. But it definitely has this otherworldly, like, fantasy-esque vibe to it. Kind of like, if anyone's seen it, it's kind of like it reminds me of Fog Hill with 5 Elements in some ways. Just how that animation is utilized for different cutscenes, or not cutscenes, different fight scenes. Like, there's a scene where a dude is fighting a giant chicken, and the amount of detail and the amount of effort that's put into that animation for, like, fire, for water, for the different debris, for the different impacts, I think is beautiful. It has this sort of, like, it definitely has this sort of, like, water-esque style of animation, where instead of it feeling like a punch, or it feeling like a blast in some way, no, it feels like a river. It feels like just a stream. That's how, like, when you're attacking and Neva is in that state where they're feeling like a ghost and everything, it feels like that. It feels like a body of water that's traveling with you. To quote Bruce Lee, you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend. That, I think, very much is in the... I think that very much sums up how I feel about that. And I honestly think that it adds to a lot of the beauty of this game in so many ways. It just adds to the combat in just visually. it's so good. Yeah, and again, I mentioned this before, but yeah, the difficulty regarding this game is it's not a pushover. Like it's tough. But it's not impossible, but it's also, you know, it very much is the case of punishing weakness and very much is the case of punishing weakness and ignorance and promoting skill. That's what it is. And yeah, it's definitely I can just feel it when I play it. Yeah, it's a good blend of fun and enjoyable combat, but also punishing and challenging at the same time. Yeah, it's definitely, and it's definitely like they put some genuine thought into so much of this. Like, it's not just like the little mob bosses that come after you or anything. It's also like the different bosses that you have to face at the end of certain levels that really do just challenge you in a lot of ways. And I love it. And it's just like, it's just, it really, it kind of has a correlation to me for sort of like the gameplay loop feeling sort of how I felt about Hades when I first played it. Where it is challenging, it feels difficult, but the more I take the time to actually pay attention to these bosses, the more I start to understand their patterns, and the more I start to understand their moves, and the more I start to feel satisfaction when I can overcome them. That's how I feel. And then the final boss is just... It's a challenge. It is. It's not incredibly, like... The thing about it is, it's not incredibly, like, tough. It's not, like... It's no Virgil from Devil May Cry, but it definitely is a challenge, especially considering you're going through all these different, like, creatures that take the shape of, like, all these different animals, so on and so forth, even utilizing the deceased. That's another thing, too, is that these creatures just utilize the dead bodies for attacking you, which is morbid and fucked up. And then at the end, instead of it being just this giant monster, it's a being that's in the shape of, like, this giant warrior, this giant swordsman. You could almost argue sort of a shadow of yourself. And yeah, it's just like the fact that they bring out a blade, it just makes... It's interesting what they went with regarding that final boss's gameplay, and just... Oh man. I gotta play through it again, honestly. I really do. It's definitely on the list of games I want to revisit. Oh man. But I love it. I genuinely love it. I also love the music in this. It definitely... It knows how to drive that balance. That's the thing. Regarding, like... Considering that this is their second game that I've played, with Nomada Studio, when it comes to their music, I feel like they know how to get atmosphere down. I really think so. And I feel like, you know, anyone could say, well, no shit. I mean, that's the point of music. Not necessarily. Some games just have a soundtrack that just really doesn't get the actual vibe down, doesn't get the actual atmosphere down. You know? Sometimes games can just, like, not actually... sometimes games can just not actually nail it when it comes to having a good soundtrack. It happens. But regarding, like, the soundtrack, I mean, there's a soundtrack that has an orchestra, and then there is a soundtrack that feels familiar. I don't know if that makes sense. But there's a difference between, like, having like sort of this southern guitar or something like that in something like Red Dead Redemption, right? And then hearing the main theme in Last of Us. There's a difference between, I think, having like strings and everything and a full orchestra and something like, say, like Shadow of the Colossus or something, right? And then that theme you hear with the strings in Telltale Games The Walking Dead. Like, some games have good music, don't get me wrong, but it always feels like wallpaper music in my eyes, where, yeah, it's good for the moment. It's good for this particular scene. But then you have music where it's just like, it is both good for the moment and good out of the moment. There's other games that do this really well too. Like I brought it up earlier, but Hades has some really good music. Like, yeah, it's good music for the moments, but you listen to it outside of the moments and genuinely, this is like, I could just listen to this on my own time. Like, that's a big thing. I think to me, stuff like factors like that, I think help keep a soundtrack from getting in that pocket of music where they're just forgettable. But yeah. Yeah, this game, I definitely... Oh man, it's something. There are so... Like, there's so few levels in this game, but there's so much to take in with them. Like, the third to last, not second to last, third to last level in this game, there's a moment where you're just running with Neva, and the bottom of the level, like the lower half, is like this reflective water surface. And it just looks so beautiful. Like, this game has such great visuals. It's an artist's playground, I can tell you that much. And then there's also some, like, there's also some environments where they do have to go for less beauty and more of a particular atmosphere. Like, they have somewhere they have to nail down more just kind of a unsettling or uncomfortable atmosphere. Like, there's an event where, not an event, sorry, a mission, not a mission, sorry, a quest, not a quest, sorry, but a level where when you traverse through it, it's like this graveyard. It's this graveyard, and it's full of, like, fog and mist, and there's so much, like, muted color work going on, where a lot of it is kind of these, like, dull blues. And I think it really works to help sell that atmosphere of just sort of this, like, uncomfortable area, this murky area in a lot of ways. Just it feels just how unclear, and the lack of, like, detail and all that, I think really helps sell it. And again, like I've said, is the atmosphere through this game really, I think, just sells the seasons. Like, you go from spring to summer to fall to winter, and then I think back to spring. And... Or wait, was it summer to... No, I think it was spring to back to spring. I think. Yeah. But definitely, I mean, like... And also, I have to mention, I rarely ever see, like, fall or autumn in video games. Like, that's a month, and then that's a month, it's a season that never really gets too much attention. I know there are some games, like, particularly, like, games with, like, photorealism and everything that do tackle it, but I rarely ever see it focused on too much when it comes to, like, other games. Like this. And I always love it. I always love seeing that month get portrayed in a visual medium like this. I don't know. That's just me, though. But yeah, definitely this game is it's just so beautiful. It's breathtaking, really. I love just the different levels that they designed for this game. I love the different sights you can see, so on and so forth. I love it so much. And then there's the ending, which honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of figured something like this would have come up, but I'm not gonna lie, I think at the end of it all, what they did in the ending just felt, I mean, it felt sad, but at the same time, I think it just, at the end of the day, I think it was on some level satisfying. It's, I don't know, it's definitely a big ending to sort of like take in, especially since it wasn't all that long ago that I started playing it. But yeah, it definitely, I definitely liked it. I think the way that they told the story, and I think the passage of time and just what happened, you know? I thought definitely the whole thing with Neva, the whole thing with the protagonist, I thought it was, I don't know, I wouldn't say necessarily that it felt right, because I don't think it felt right, but I will say that I think it didn't feel like a cop-out. It didn't feel like, oh, well, we have to. Oh, well, we just gotta do this. That's what it didn't feel like. That's what I can say about it. Yeah. But in the end, I love the ending. I love that Neva, like, later on would kind of go on their own to have a kid. Love it. And the reason why I say they is because, I don't know the gender. I could look it up, but, I imagine Neva is a girl. I could be wrong on that. But, one, I don't know, they never really, like, dropped the gender or anything, and two, I'm not that curious. I'm not about to go underneath Neva and go, oh yeah, let's see the gender. I don't need to see animal genitalia I don't need to see animal genitalia that much to sort of guess the fucking gender. Whatever. But yeah, anyway. I definitely think it's a fine enough game. Regarding the story, it's a fine enough story, it's a fine enough game, but regarding the visuals, I think is just definitely, if nothing else, I would definitely recommend getting this game, if nothing else, for the visuals, because this game is so gorgeous. The playground they had regarding color, like, I can't even fathom how large that was. That's just how beautiful this fucking game is. I honestly should have expected this, though, because these are the same guys that made Gris, and that game also had a pretty vibrant understanding and usage of color. Although, in that game, it was more simplified, because every different location was a representation of grief, and as such, every location had, like, select colors. So, a lot of it just kind of drowned into specific colors. Whereas with this, no, it's heavily vibrant. There's so much color throughout the world. There's so much color in these different levels. So much so that I think what's more interesting is when levels have, like, a lack of vibrancy and a lack of, like, multicolor to them. That I think it sticks more in my mind. Like, there's a full dream sequence, middle of the game, that is just covered in red and black. And that's just throughout the entire level, and it's just like, it sticks in my mind. But yeah. This is definitely, I think, Neva is absolutely one of my favorite games still. I don't know necessarily if it is in my top 10 games. I would have to play it again before I make that decision. But in terms of like first playthrough, in terms of it being fresh in my mind still, I remember it fondly. There wasn't really much I actually... Yeah, there wasn't really much at all I actually hated. Not really. Were there things that were kind of, like, aggravating on some level? Sure, but I think that was more kind of a skill issue than anything on my end. I think that was it. But yeah, I enjoyed this game. I enjoyed the time I spent with it. I enjoyed the story that they told me. I enjoyed the visuals. I enjoyed the world I got to see. Like, genuinely, like... Oh man, part of me wants to see a game like this in 3D, like an open world aspect, and I'm just exploring these different ruins and these different locations. But done in sort of the same manner, if that makes any sense. Like, I don't want... I don't want another game inspired by Breath of the Wild to kind of go do the same kind of storytelling and the same kind of game design in a lot of ways. No. I kind of want another Journey by that game company. I kind of want another Sky by that game company. That's what I'm kind of looking for. I want a game that has this big open world, this big world that just you could just explore and learn more about and see all these different sites and sort of piece things together yourself. Traversing a bygone age. That's kind of what I'm searching for. I want to traverse days of old just by myself. That's kind of what I want. And I wouldn't necessarily say that this game, that was the point here, or that was their intention, but definitely it gave off those vibes where traversing these different locations, these different ruins, they feel like remnants of a bygone era, of a bygone age, and I think that's interesting. At least to me. I mean, if there's anything... I think I've gotten through all of this, but if there's anything I kind of hope for down the line, I would honestly say I kind of hope that if we are getting another game by Nomada Studio later down the line, I mean, I guess all I really hope is, like, outdo yourself with this one. I'm not going to ask for anything as drastic as, hey, can you change up how you develop your video game to being in 3D or anything? Just because that's what I was looking for regarding a video game doesn't automatically mean I'm going to push that on Nomada Studio for expectations. No, I think it's very clear that they are kind of sticking with this particular style. But if there are future hopes, I mean, I guess improving on just how you utilize the art direction with interactive objects and all that, I think could be more beneficial. But outside of that, I don't know, maybe if they want to go down the route of doing like Metroidvania platformers, I guess variety and like the different options you have for combat. Sort of like what they did with Ori and the Blind Forest. Sorta. And also, I've also heard this criticism regarding Gris, and I kind of see what they were saying, but I guess replayability. I think the big thing about these games, I think the big thing about what Nomada Studio does is that their games are very straight-lined. Essentially, the games don't really feel like they want to have you go back to certain areas at any point. On one hand, you can say that that's kind of the point where, definitely it's very much you're going through all of this just one at a time. If you want to actually see any of the previous locations and whatnot, you're going to have to replay the game. I know very much Journey, like I brought it up, I know very much Journey did that as well. I think Sky also did that as well. But I guess, I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like if this game had the time the time it needed, and they were actually capable of having like the story sort of be around certain locations and having you go back and forth between them and whatnot, and doing it right and making them like here's the thing I don't want, right? I don't want the gameplay to become tedious. That's the big thing. I don't want, if we're going to be able to travel from place to place back and forth, don't make the gameplay uninteresting. Don't make the gameplay boring. That's all I ask regarding that. Other than that, I don't really know what else to hope for. I mean, as far as I can tell, yeah, I mean, like, for two of their games, some criticism here or there, but ultimately, I genuinely have enjoyed these games. I have had fun with them, I have been entertained, and they have brought a lot of great, enjoyable experiences with me playing them. But yeah. Maybe we'll get another game that's sort of in the same style as Neva. Or, I don't know, maybe we'll get a different story altogether. Or hey, maybe, what if they end up going down the route of what that game company did, and instead we get another free-to-play game that has a full story that you can experience on your own or with friends, and the major thing with how that game makes money is that they just have cosmetics and that's it. Honestly, I feel like that could be awesome. Honestly, like, if the game wants to take, like, notes from something like Sky, but go with the same sort of art direction and whatnot that they went with Gris, honestly, that's perfectly fine. Like, the art direction with Gris and Neva, like, I think that's fine. I would like that. I don't know. Only time will tell, I suppose. But yeah. That's gonna do it. Pretty much. Yeah, I wasn't really sure about doing this. Just by myself, but, there's a lot of games that I just kind of, am interested in by myself, or just kind of want to talk about with myself, but I just always hold them off because I just kind of made this whole thing where I wanted to have the podcast be with me and my friends, and not necessarily something I just do myself. So, I don't know. But yeah, I can't necessarily say if this does well, but if I feel like it, if I look back at this and I'm like, yeah, you know what, I enjoyed doing that, I want to do it again, I feel like it will, and I'll talk about some games that I genuinely liked, just kind of on my own, but either way. Yeah, that's gonna do it. So, for everyone at home and whatnot, thank you all so much for joining me. I have links in the description. I have BlueSky, I have Cara, I have a portfolio on Artstation. If you want to support me personally, ko-fi.com/theartsocialshow. And if you want to check me out when I'm doing party games and whatnot, I'm on Twitch at twitch.tv/cafeautumn. And if you want to stick around for more podcasts, feel free to subscribe to this channel, I guess. Anyway, I'm gonna get out of here. I hope all of you take care and have a good day. And also, feel free to check out Neva, made by Nomada Studio. And also, I would have to double check, but I'm pretty sure it's available on... Well, for one, I know it's available on Steam. If you are interested in buying it, Neva is available for PC, PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X and S. So there you go. So yeah, in the meantime, I'm gonna get out of here. I hope all of you take care and have a good day. Peace.